Welcome to the nation's Diplomatic Dispatch, your window into the world of diplomacy and international affairs. I'm JESSY CHAHAL. Today we look at an evolving partnership between Malaysia and the EU or the European Union. And joining me in the studio today is none other than His Excellency RAFAEL, DAERR, Ambassador of the EU to Malaysia, to share insights on the ties shaping this very important relationship. Welcome, Your Excellency. It's good to have you with us, and we do look forward to an interesting conversation, but also perhaps we look forward to having you in the studio again and again from time to time. It's an important time across the world right now, but also to look at how you assumed your post not too long ago in October of 2024. That was a time when both the EU and Malaysia ties, both sides were looking for new shores and gaining new insights as well. What were your initial impressions upon arriving here at Malaysia, and what are your top priorities? What's on your to-do list while you're here?
Well, good afternoon. Selamat sejahtera. Thank you very much for having me on the program. My arrival and the to-do list. First, maybe from a personal perspective, I think the welcome was very warm and wonderful, I might say. My first time in Malaysia was in the 70s with my parents, my brother. We drove from Johor to Mersing and Pulau Tioman, so a long time ago. And then 15 years ago, we came back and decided to spend our honeymoon here with my wife. So I do admit that there's an emotional and affectionate connection and side to my relationship with the country, and I was very much looking forward to coming back. So from a professional standpoint, absolutely, it was vibrant and then positively intense since I arrived. You rightly referred to the context. We had coming from COVID and very difficult times, an opening in many ways with the signing of the agreement of the PCA, the Partnership and Cooperation Agreement, which would be a framework that would allow us to substantially widen our cooperation in institutional terms too. And we're now in the process of ratification. We still had a bit of a discussion on palm oil and EUDR lingering, I must say. So when I arrived here, there were a few things that we were hoping to bring forward, and it has been, I believe, a time of delivery and teamwork of our Malaysian partners, and on our side, the wider EU family, to bring things forward. So if I look at the first 6-7 months, I could probably not be happier, I would say, because we had a very successful visit of Prime Minister Anwar to Brussels. Together with 3 ministers on that occasion. We decided jointly, the Prime Minister Anwar and President von der Leyen, to relaunch the FTA negotiations, which I think is a huge thing with significant potential. Then we had other engagements at senior officials meeting, incoming visits, cooperation, a big EU-Malaysia business day in Penang with over 300 companies. So it's been very vibrant. So now looking forward, I'm quite enthusiastic, because I think in this year of EU, not only for EU-Malaysia relations, but also EU-ASEAN relations, with Malaysia having the chairmanship of ASEAN, I believe we will hopefully, mark my words, but see high-level incoming European visits to Malaysia, which would allow us to develop even more traction in bringing our common projects forward.
Absolutely. So, it is an interesting point of time as well, when there's a lot of things in motion on the back of Malaysia being ASEAN's chair, and having you here seated with us in this discussion as well. When we look at the EU, it has become an important piece of how we trade and our international relations as well. In your view, Mr. Ambassador, what areas hold the greatest potential for us to come together, work together even more in terms of a strategic partnership?
Partnership, I think, is key. The word, it's one that is it's bi-directional, meaning that I believe that the EU can be a significant, reliable partner for Malaysia, but also Malaysia is a very important partner for Europe. Let me give you just where we stand 2 examples: trade or investments. On trade, we are the 4th biggest trade partner of Malaysia. Conversely, we as EU import more goods from Malaysia than from many larger industrial countries, 16th biggest source of imports, and that for an economy that is 35th biggest in the world means that Malaysia kind of punches above its weight. No, they are significant for us and in terms of goods traded, it's very significant ones. It's E&E, electronics, semiconductors, and machinery, so it's very relevant. Secondly, in terms of investments, the European Union member states and their companies are a huge investor in the country, and depending on how you do the calculations, and if you look at FDI stocks, but probably at least the second biggest altogether, if not the biggest one, if you look at the past 4 or 5 decades. So it's a partnership which we value and where we want to invest as Europeans long term. So looking at the potential, and it's true, it's, I would say, a partnership with a lot of untapped potential. First and foremost, trade, I think there is more in it. We represent
last year between both, there was a trade that surpassed 40 billion euros.
Absolutely, with a little less than 30 billion goods being exported to the EU, so a significant Malaysian trade surplus. But if you compare that in terms of amount of trade, it's approximately 8 to 9% of Malaysia's exports. If you look at the EU economy, which represents roughly 15% of the world economy, there is room for increasing that. So the FTA, I think, is centerpiece for us to develop more traction in this regard, because what we could look at would be a similar development than the one we've seen in Vietnam or in Singapore, but maybe we'll get to that later. I think there's a joint ambition on many fronts. Take the environment, for example, on green and increasing renewable energies or circular economy, improving the way we deal with resources. There is, I think, our interest to have a diversification of supply chains, which coincides with what Malaysia has to offer, and vice versa. So I think we have a lot to work on, and if you combine this with an strong interpersonal connections and increasing ones at the educational level, but also in terms of R&D, where I think we could also bring a lot to the table, the trajectory is very positive.
That's right. I think that going back to your to-do list, I think that's a long list with many things already being checked as we speak. Now we look at one of the themes of ASEAN as well, and that is sustainability. And that is not just a buzzword, but it's an active point in which most countries are also looking to have progress on. And when we talk about trade and sustainability, that is also between the conversation that is at the heart of both EU and Malaysia. We look at the CBAM as well as the EU DAERR. These are also two areas in which there's a lot of traction here in Southeast Asia. In terms of exploring the revival of the Malaysia-EU FTA, the Free Trade Agreement, what would that updated framework look like to you, and how can it then move on to benefit both parties in today's economic landscape or climate?
You indeed threw a lot of things on the plate: FTA, CBAM, EU DAERR. I'll maybe leave CBAM and EU DAERR for later, unless you want me to talk about it. So focusing on the FTA, we have two countries that are very trade, or Malaysia and the EU as 27 member states, that are very trade oriented. So we do want to trade. We believe in the multilateral WTO trading system, and we see now, after a scoping exercise of over 2 years, the possibility to negotiate a bilateral FTA between the EU and Malaysia that would do several things. First, on tariffs, lower them even further, so basically improve the bridge between the two region countries in order to trade more, better, more easily. And then there's also the behind the border elements with standards, recognitions that we'll be looking at with the ESG standards, trade and sustainability chapters, but which would basically do also ease doing business. And I think this is what is key. It's not doing this for the paper, it's to have an impact concretely for people trading, so consumers being able to acquire products cheaper, but also for businesses to sell their own more easily abroad. So I think the projections, I've been referring to Vietnam and Singapore, 2019 entry into force of the FTA with Singapore, 2020 with Vietnam. You have seen increases of between 20-30% in the case of Singapore, and above 30 up to 40% with Vietnam in 4 years.
Right.
Huge potential we would like to see too. And maybe two last things. First, that the FTA is more than trade. It will also set a framework that clearly says the two sides believe in this partnership for the long term, and it sets a framework that will also allow businesses to invest better. Second element I wanted to say is the context. It's been very shaky recently, and I think what we've seen recently was detrimental to the world economy, detrimental to businesses. They want predictability, rules, transparency. And here, I think, regarding the FTA, what it is, it's more like a catalyzer. It makes it even more important, and it's one more reason to turn towards each other and to trade more between the EU and Malaysia.
Exactly. We are stronger and more strategic when we are, in this sort of joint venture moving forward. You mentioned, it being a bridge with the FTA as well, but what has happened in the world right now with the US, could you give us an insight into what you see as the end game? 168 states has also been affected. How badly has this damaged international markets or, the economy in Europe?
Well, I think we've seen the up and downs and the difficulty to predict. What I would say is three things. First, it's not been positive. It's impacted negatively predictions, and you've seen the stock markets react to it, the up and downs. But secondly, we as European Union, we believe in our trade relations, in the multilateral trading system, including our relations with the US. If you look at it, it's by far the biggest trade artery in the world. 1.6 trillion euro of trade annually, plus the investments. The imbalances are not huge, around 3% if you combine services and goods. So we want to preserve this. We believe it's in the interest of our economy and of the US economy. I will spare you the details, but there are several millions of jobs created in the US because of EU investments, 300 billion euro a year investment flows into the US, and conversely, US exports to the EU, for example, are also generating millions of jobs in the US. The same goes for Europe. So we want to preserve that. We nevertheless do not want to accept unilateral measures that would be too or detrimental for our companies. So we have prepared the ground, and I believe we are resilient because we trade 60% within the EU, and we are a big trading bloc. So we did prepare measures if necessary, but we have engaged in a dialogue, and so far with the freeze of the measures and the talks ongoing, we remain optimistic that we'll hopefully see what we've seen in other cases, and that is a reduction to ideally square one. So net zero and as little tariffs as possible, because that's beneficial for both sides.
Right, and we look at other areas of trade as well between both sides of Malaysia and the EU. The issue of oil palm, has that problem been resolved in your opinion?
Well, oil palm is roughly 2.5% of trade with the EU. It's, I think, historical, cultural, emotional significance, and in terms of jobs, it's much higher. So it's been an issue, as I said, but I would dare to say that what I had seen following the subject also before coming here as something that was detrimental, a stumbling block in our relations, has now clearly become here in Malaysia an opportunity. Why I say opportunity is that I see industry, and I have to commend both industry with the standards that they have introduced since decades. It's nothing to do with EU measures taken, RSPO, MSPO in the palm oil sector. The standards that you've seen now, MSPO plus or 2, they are important. Now you have an industry that is partly well ahead of the curve and able to deliver EUDR compliant palm oil now. So we had even some who informally came to see us and say, why did you delay by a year? We were ready, we wanted to reap the benefits of this high value market for sustainable palm oil. But I think what is important is we want to open this market for as many as possible, including, and one of the positive sides is that we have reopened the discussion on how could we include smallholders into the high value chain. They have been excluded also from RSPO to a large extent. I think only 2-3% so far have basically benefited from this. Now we want to include them. So what we do in the sector on EUDR CBAM, I think, is seek dialogue, explain better why we did these, and I can talk more about it if you want, but especially look at how could we propose where useful technical support, aid. We have 2 million that we now took as a project to actually prepare businesses, smallholders and administration to jointly get there and walk through the finishing line. And then lastly, to where need be, also maybe adapt, adjust the mechanisms. So that's why we went for the delay, because we listened to our partners, for it to become an opportunity for businesses, and it will not concern the entire sector yet.
Right. So based on that, and just to take you back earlier in your reference to the CBAM or CBAM and EUDR, how is the EU engaging with Malaysia's stakeholders to really drive this motion, and also to ensure that measures are understood and implemented fairly?
Well, we referred to dialogue, and I'll be very brief. We had a trilateral task force together with Indonesia and Malaysia on palm oil with the EU to look into this and what went wrong and what we could do better to implement it well. And secondly, we have a bilateral dialogue with Malaysia. Since I arrived, I think several times a month I engage with the MPOC, MPOB, MPOA, with the palm oil industry. I go to bigger conferences. I have seen palm oil plantations to learn, to see, and to see where we have to adjust. Adjust why? Because we do not want to hinder or make exports complicated or difficult, because we need the palm oil, both palm oil and kernel palm oil. So we want this to work as much as the industry wants this to work. And it's been very beneficial. YB Johari was in Brussels together with the Prime Minister, and he saw his counterpart, Commissioner RAFAEL, in January. They had a very good conversation. I had the impression that she was very impressed by the work that has been done by Malaysia, see where we are, and now we're looking into how we can jointly basically deliver. So I think it's a complete change of approach in that respect.
And in terms of trade and investment, you touched on that a little. Has there been any significant investments from EU companies into Malaysia, or perhaps even vice versa? What is the level of trade between both sides?
Level of trade, you already touched upon it, 45 billion euro up and down, around 30, a little less in last year, Malaysian exports to the EU, and around 15-ish, a bit less from the EU to Malaysia. So this is where we stand now, and the projections are very positive if we get this FTA through the finishing line. On investment, my summary is wow. Yeah? And this is, I have to stress it, it's EU member state companies investing here. Now, as I said, second biggest FDI at least, depending on how you calculate. And only in recent years we've seen, and I'm not going to mention individual member states, but sectors, electronics, semiconductor, nearly 10 billion invested. You've seen this in Kulim, in Malacca, where they're scaling up, building what is to be the largest power fab semiconductor production site, front end. You have other sectors, construction sector, modern construction materials in Perak, where another member state has invested a few hundred million. You have other sectors now in the beverage industry to make production lines more sustainable. And ultimately, what we're looking in also on stainless steel that is produced in an environmental friendly manner here. If you sum all of this up, you have had trimester and semesters in the past 3-4 years where one single member state was topping the chart of FDI source. So you had once the Netherlands, once the Austrians, once the Germans, who alone were basically topping the chart. And I think that gives you an indication of how many companies are here. And if I would want to add one thing is, if I look at this closely and I go see these facilities, I always get positive feedback. Why? Because it's Malaysians working there. It's hundreds of thousands of jobs in Malaysia. The management is generally Malaysians, if not immediately then after a few years of introduction. And everybody basically tells you that it provides added value, because it actually is an investment into the country, and we don't bring everything here except the know-how and the investment, and then we use the resources, the rich ones here. Right.
So if we take that as an example and expand that to other sectors, we're looking at some of the new sectors now, green technologies, cybersecurity, and AI as well. Between Malaysia and the EU, is there scope for deeper cooperation, perhaps on innovation as well?
Innovation, I'll mention two sectors, I think: green transition and green industry, and digital. The first important message is our goals align. You know, we are clearly as EU one of the front runners in terms of environmental protection and trying to put into practice a commitment that we have jointly take the Paris Agreement. Now, Malaysia does the same. You know, you look at the various decisions taken, the National Climate Change Policy 2.0 or the National Energy Transition Roadmap, the National Adoption Plan, goals like 50% of forest cover to be preserved in the country, to, I think, 45% reduction of carbon emissions by 2030 and net zero by 2050. It's amazingly ambitious goals and the efforts are really there. So a reason to team up. We have several member states who are absolutely cutting edge in terms of green tech. So they are here and they want to do more. So this is, I think, an area of cooperation. Let me briefly touch upon the digital one. Digital, I would just refer to, for example, 5G. We have had a visionary decision by the government to go for a digital national berhad, which is a wholesale system that you've never seen in the whole world. And then one European company that provided the technology, it propelled Malaysia from place 70-something to the top 3 in terms of 5G connected countries in the world. Absolutely amazing success. So what we now want to see is to build on this, to have the framework for Industry 4.0 for consumers and businesses to profit from it. Also for investors who are watching this closely, they want to see this successful model preserved as it is. Then you can build other things around it, but that's, I think, the important element.
It's an approach and a model and infrastructure that presents itself well
Absolutely.
In terms of
and a good
how
basis
it works.
for much more.
Right. Now, how do you view the EU's relationship or evolving relationship with ASEAN now that you've been here? It's more like inside looking out. What role can Malaysia play in terms of being the best ASEAN chair?
I think ASEAN is for us probably, we always say the EU and ASEAN, we see them as the most successful and biggest regional organizations. Now, we as EU, it's in our DNA to work regionally among the regional families. So we want to support ASEAN countries to do the same. Malaysia has always been very ambitious. They were behind the multi-year strategic plans 10 years ago. This year, you will have another set of strategies to be adopted. We'll be following the summit very closely and the events in the coming days and weeks. And what we'll see is a strategy that is to set the direction of cooperation among ASEAN for the next 20 years. Why is that essential? For us, this is a region where the future of the planet will be shaped, the only planet we have. So for good or for bad, this is where we need to do things right, and I think Malaysia plays a key role. We want to engage, so there's, I think, at least 3 commissioners that will engage at ministerial level with ASEAN this year in the field of environment, in the Asian Regional Forum, so foreign policy, in the area of economic and industry. And then who knows, there might be another one coming, and hopefully some form of a summit head of state meeting between the EU and ASEAN as well later this year. But this is something we jointly discuss with the chairmanship, and we're looking forward to more engagement.
Right. We talked about building a better future and shaping the world, and we look at the link between, the other very important areas, education and arts, as well as the youth. What are some of your thoughts there in terms of ASEAN moving forward, not just as a bloc, but a player globally?
I think it's a key area because education is the future, and art is what brings our life to life, if I may say it that way.
That's nice. I like that, Mr. Ambassador.
You have to invest in that area. We do in Europe. We also do invest in international cooperation exchange programs up to 100 billion euro. That is Erasmus plus Erasmus Mundus and Horizon Europe, for example. And there we are scaling up our cooperation, for example, with Malaysia. We are opening an Erasmus Plus hub here very soon. We want more engagement at the research level and by students. ASEAN, you mentioned it. We have a scope HE, that's a higher education regional cooperation program where we support ASEAN to go further in what they do, what ASEAN member states do among themselves. And it's not that we have to and can replicate what we've done in Europe, but I think we have some lessons learned where exchanging about what we've done and what worked, what didn't, can be helpful for a region like ASEAN that successfully wants to walk down the same line and have fruitful academic cooperation.
So, of course, much to talk about and lots to unpack here as well as to exchange. But for now, Mr. Ambassador, if you could leave our viewers with one message about the EU, what does it stand for and what does it hope to achieve, especially here in Malaysia? What would that message be?
I think a few days after 9th of May, Europe Day, the main message is that we stand for multilateralism, peace and prosperity. So we are a reliable partner that is basically made up of countries that are similarly large as Malaysia. If you would make Malaysia an EU member state, they would be the 6th biggest in terms of population, and you'd be the 11th biggest in terms of size of economy. So you'd be on the upper tier, just to show you that we are just a group of countries that had decided to work together. We want to replicate that and establish partnerships with countries that believe in the same principles, so multilateralism and rules-based cooperation. Why? Because else the big players will push us around. We need this framework, and this is why we really want to invest. So message number one. Message number two, we believe in this partnership for the long run. And thirdly, we have to talk about it more, promote it, I think make it a brand. For me, it's a bit like a hidden jewel, and if you explain it to people, people get all excited, and I think we should, in both our interests, promote Malaysia more in Europe and promote Europe more in Malaysia.
Well, this is, I guess, the start of that, if nothing else. Thank you very much, Mr. Ambassador, for coming in and sharing and spending some time with us. Well, today's conversation has highlighted how far Malaysia and the EU have come and the exciting path that lies ahead. This partnership is not only growing, but also adapting to the challenges and opportunities of our time. That's all the time we have on today's edition. I'm JESSY CHAHAL. This has been the Diplomatic Dispatch, your window into the world of diplomacy and international affairs. Thanks for tuning in.
Thank you very much for having me.